As you can see on the board here, my name is Jeriel Smith. I am currently the master of the Southern California Research Lodge, and we have a booth down in the booth area, and I'm going to talk about the relationships between Freemasonry and the Tarot. Also, in honor of my aged existence these days and my sore feet, I'm going to sit down and push the little buttons here so you can see some of the illustrations. The big project of the Research Lodge is the magazine that we publish every month except January. And we've been doing this. This is our 4th year of doing the magazine in this format. Our purpose as a research lodge is restoring Masonic education and observant practices. And Masonic education is, in our opinion, what is the necessary step in Masonry to restore the old ways that Masonry works. And so every month we publish a magazine, and each one of them is designed to be a unit of Masonic education. And that this month is on the relationship between the fraternity of Freemasonry and the Tarot, which most people have heard about but may not know too much about. One of the uses that we promote for the magazine is that if someone wants to do Masonic education at their lodge, they can take any one of these magazine issues and have all of the materials in front of them to give a decent talk on a particular subject. And part of what my purpose here today is to demonstrate how that works. So you will see that there are going to be several times that I will be actually reading from this issue. All of our materials are either original writing, one of which we have in this issue, or they are excerpted from a wide variety of Masonic publications and books, and all of them are annotated. At the bottom there's an attribution, and it tells you where you can connect into the source from which that material is taken. And so this is an introduction to any given subject that you want to look into. The magazine always starts out with an introduction, either from the master of the lodge or one of the 2 main editors. This month it's myself as the master of the Research Lodge. And the relationships between Freemasonry and Tarot are many. The primary relationship is that each is a comprehensive system of esoteric knowledge, gnosis, emerging from the manifold streams known as the ancient wisdom. It stretches back to the dim recesses of human history. And I prefer the term the ageless wisdom, as this trend started before the advent of written history and continues to be reiterated into the present day and will continue to be reiterated as our yet untold future comes forth. Freemasonry and Tarot share the salient feature of conveying wisdom through symbols and imagery. This feature protects the deepest spiritual meanings from being comprehended by those of unworthy motive. On the other hand, the symbolism bestows an intentional ambiguity and universality that allows truth seekers from any background or tradition to access their own esoteric truths by such contemplative practices as reflection, meditation, and prayer. It's important to add that the true seeker should understand that the nature of these truths is that of understanding rather than belief, gnosis rather than faith. Moreover, it is important to put insights thus gained into one's practical living of a moral life, much more important than it is to have an understanding intellectually of any of these kind of teachings. Freemasonry is an initiatory order, and like many ancient wisdom schools, whereas they tended to have higher and lower, inner and outer initiation ceremonies, we Masons all take the same 3 craft degrees. But due to different individual interests, some of us do not take our initiatory experiences to esoteric depths through further study and contemplative practices. By contrast, tarot is not specifically initiatory. However, as you'll hear later in the talk, the Golden Dawn is an initiatory order, and the tarot is directly involved in their initiation process. The 4 letters involved in the word tarot, written in a circle, may be interpreted as Rota, Torah, Orta, Taro. Translated, the wheel of the law speaks by or through the tarot. We always feature a Masonic pioneer in our magazine. And this month's Masonic pioneer is Arthur Edward Waite, who developed a card system to study the esoteric arts deeply and symbolically. Arthur Edward Waite, born in 1857 and died in 1942, was a Freemason, an occultist, a mystic, and an author. He's best known as the developer of the most popular tarot deck, the Rider-Waite deck. As his biographer, R.A. Gilbert, describes him, Waite's name has survived because he was the first to attempt a systematic study of the history of Western esotericism, viewed as a spiritual tradition rather than as aspects of a proto-science or as the pathway of a religion. In his book, in the Book of Ceremonial Magic, Waite describes the Kabbalah and ceremonial magic. Ceremonial magic uses symbols to convey ideas and stories. He says that symbolism, quote, is treated either as a barren mystification, a collection of supremely absurd treatises, in which obscure nonsense is enunciated with preternaturally solemnity, or it is regarded as a body of theosophy, written chiefly in the form of symbolism. The Kabbalah, he says, is a storehouse of symbolism, the inner sense of which is or may be of great importance. In his book, The Pictorial Key to the Tarot, Waite writes that tarot embodies symbolic presentations of universal ideas, behind which lie all of the implicit aspects of the human mind. And it is in this sense that they contain secret doctrine, which is the realization by the few of truths embedded in the consciousness of all, though they have not yet passed into express recognition by ordinary men. The picture, icons, and symbols of the tarot present ideals and truths universal to man, regardless of culture. Joseph Campbell presents this view in his Hero with 1,000 Faces, where he discusses his theory of the mythological structure of the journey of the archetype hero found in world myths. Waite's tarot deck incorporates Masonic and Kabbalistic imagery. This deck was unique because it was the first modern deck in which the cards of the minor arcana were illustrated and not just those of the major arcana. The creator of the Solsa Busca deck did this earlier, back in the 15th century. Earlier tarot authors such as Jean-Baptiste Alliette, also known as Atelier, and S.L. Matthews, both Freemasons, were believed to have heavily influenced Waite's tarot interpretations and the images and illustrations he used. Tarot scholar and researcher R.V. O'Neill reports that, in an article in the Occult Review, Waite stated that as he and Pamela Coleman Smith designed the deck, quote, we have had other help from one who is deeply versed in the subject. O'Neill further states that Roger Parisius suggested that this help came from William Butler Yeats. Yeats, the famous Irish poet, was a member of the Golden Dawn, about which we'll hear more detail in a few minutes, with which Waite was prominently associated. Additional Masonic themes and symbols. In spite of the fact that tarot decks have recently been produced with the purposeful and sometimes superficial additional Masonic symbols, themes, and symbols, called, for example, the Masonic Tarot, the Square and Compass Tarot, there's no historical precedence for any such deck. Tarot itself is considered by Waite to have originated from sources in southern France in the 14th century. The Montaigne Tarot deck, which you see photos here, was created in 1485, and this was one of the very first illustrated decks. The images were created by Botticelli and Baldini. They had a complete set of 50 cards, sometimes referred to as tarots. They were originally engraved on thin paper in 1485, and they're apparently an instructive series as they could not be shuffled or dealt. However, the Kabbalistic significance of these cards is apparent. This card deck is explored in Manly Palmer Hall's magnum opus, The Secret Teachings of All Ages. This was something that Manly Palmer Hall wrote and actually published long before he was ever a Mason, when he was but 29 years old. And one of the things that he has to say in his section in the book about tarot is the 10 globes and 22 channels of the Sephiroth, the Tree of Life, were analogous to the 32 degrees of Freemasonry. So that is another connection between the tarot and Freemasonry. As they're both iterations of the ageless wisdom, they have, as Joseph Campbell has explicated in the previously mentioned book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, there are archetypal hero stories. Almost every mystery school tradition has a founder or a central figure in their particular mythology. And as Campbell outlines in that book, they all follow a pattern. In Freemasonry, at least at this time, we have what is called the Haramic Legend, based on the life and career of Hiram Abiff, who was the architect that was brought in to help King Solomon from biblical times construct the Solomon's Temple. And that is the current heroic legend that is brought forth in Masonic ritual today. Masonic ritual, as many people do not understand, does not have a single unified ritual, nor has the ritual been static over time. Prior to the founding of the first Grand Lodges in Freemasonry in 1717 by 4 London lodges, the ritual was what was called the Noahite Masonry. And it had in common that it also had to do with a builder. In that case, Noah, who of course had built the ark that metaphorically saved humanity from the flood in biblical times. And in that ritual presentation, Noah dies without passing on to his sons the secrets of building an ark. In the constitutions of the original Grand Lodge, there is a traditional history of Freemasonry that starts by saying that the first Mason was Adam. And it goes through and gives a history where everybody in the Old Testament that ever built anything is metaphorically a Mason. Freemasonry starts sometime probably in the 1500s to 1600s as what are called speculative Masons began to be added to lodges that were consisting of what are called operative Masons. The men mostly, but women too, built the cathedrals and the castles that still exist all over Europe. The tarot has a bit of a different history, but also shares with Freemasonry, and I'm not being able to get my computer to advance to my next slide. Come on, guys. Help me out here. There it is. The Tarot of Marseille is the first known standard pattern for tarot cards. It was invented in Italy and was introduced in France in 1499. It became a model for many later decks, and the example shown here is from a deck that was actually published in 1760. There is no historical connection between the tarot and Freemasonry. They evolved parallel to one another. But as we're going to hear in a moment, Freemasons were very much involved in the popularization of Freemasonry, tarot, in the 18th and during the 19th and 20th centuries. And prominent among these is the previously mentioned Golden Dawn. There's the Golden Dawn Tarot. All three of the founders of what was called and still is called the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn were Freemasons. They're William Wynne Westcott, William Robert Woodman, and Samuel Liddell Mathers. Other prominent members were also Masons, including Arthur Edward Waite, Paul Foster Case, Arthur Conan Doyle, William Butler Yeats, and Aleister Crowley. The tarot and the Kabbalistic tree of life were essential parts of the Golden Dawn's rituals. S.L. McGregor Mathers created the first of the Golden Dawn Tarot decks. There are several modern decks that claim to be Golden Dawn Tarot. And based on my research, I believe that the best modern Golden Dawn Tarot deck was created by Robert Wang, a Golden Dawn member, and was under the supervision of Israel Regarde, who is also a Mason, and the two of them together created that deck. This is an example of Wang's Golden Dawn Tarot cards. We see here the King of Cups and the Prince of Cups, the King of Wands and the Prince of Wands. These are taken from what are called the court cards. A tarot deck has court cards. They're very parallel. In fact, one of the things I'm not going to go into much in this talk, but that it's explored in the magazine, is that modern day playing cards really evolved from the tarot cards. You have the ace through the 10, which are called, together with the court cards, which are called the minor arcana. The difference is in a regular deck of cards, there are 52 cards. The minor arcana have 56. Besides having a king and a queen and what in modern times is called the jack is actually called a prince of wands and or of whatever suit it is. And then there's also an added card called a page. These are called the court cards for obvious reasons. And they generally, when you're reading cards, have to do with particular individuals that may have an influence on what's being explored. The thing that is most popular are the 22 cards of what are called the major arcana. And the major arcana were illustrated long before the court card, the minor arcana were. In fact, one of the things that really distinguishes the Rider-Waite deck, that we'll get into some more detail in a minute, is that it was the first deck to fully illustrate all of the cards, all 78 cards of the tarot deck. Another prominent Mason that I mentioned before, Aleister Crowley, after he left the Golden Dawn, founded Ordo Templi Orientis, which is still in existence today, and designed what was called the Thoth Tarot deck. It was painted by Lady Frieda Harris. On the board here you will see the Fool, the Magus, which is generally called the Magician card in most decks, and the Priestess from that deck. As you can see, they're very, very elaborate illustrations. The Rider-Waite deck, Rider is the publisher. A.E. Waite was the primary designer, and he was assisted by Pamela Coleman Smith, who did the illustrations. She drew them and colored them. She was also a member of the Golden Dawn. Unlike Freemasonry, the Golden Dawn was not just limited to men, and I'll just add editorially, there are now, in our state, for example, several women's grad lodges that are also a single gender institution, but they study the same kind of teachings that Masons do. So Masonic symbols abound in this deck. and especially in the High Priestess card, which we see here. If you look at the back of the room, you see the two pillars, and they are on either side of the entry to the lodge room. That is where candidates for initiation come in for each of their degrees. They're named Boaz and Jockey, and as you see here, the B and the J. And I've got a treatment here. Yes. Waite's tarot deck incorporates Masonic and Kabbalistic imagery, as I said before. And the card illustrated here, the High Priestess, holds the Torah, which consists of the 5 books of Moses in her hands. The Torah represents the greater law. She sits between 2 pillars, J and B, and those pillars relate back to the pillars that were on the porch to the entrance to King Solomon's temple. The temple is embroidered with palms and pomegranates, which have symbolic significance. She represents the supernal mother, the Shekinah. Mystically speaking, the Shekinah is the spiritual bride of the just man. And when he reads the law, she provides the divine meaning. This is probably the most easily recognized Masonic symbol, a symbolism, a card that has Masonic symbolism. A lot of the Masonic symbolism in most tarot decks and even in the Rider-Waite deck are much more subtly presented. It's a fundamental truth that symbolism, particularly Masonic symbolism, doesn't have a single meaning. In our rituals, the candidate is given a particular meaning for the symbol, but what you get in the initiation, each one of the degrees is an initiation. You're initiated originally as an entered apprentice. You go to a fellow of the craft or fellow craft, and finally a master mason. The deeper meaning of the symbolism is what we mean by Masonic education. We feel that an initiation, what does initiation mean? It means the start of something. So the initiation only gives you an introduction. Each initiation opens a doorway. If you don't do anything but open that doorway, you continue the symbolism. Only when you study the symbol, you discuss it, you read about it. There are volumes and volumes on Masonic symbolism, and most important, that you contemplate the symbolism. Now, I think most of you are maybe familiar with the what are called the 4 cardinal virtues of Freemasonry. And let me find my place here where we talk about the cardinal virtues. Having their origin in Plato's Republic, the 4 cardinal virtues were not known as such until their inclusion in the Christian tradition by St. Ambrose, St. Augustine, and others around the late 300s. Sometime in the mid-18th century, lectures pertaining to the cardinal virtues became a regular part of Masonic ritual. A man who I'm going to show you a slide of in a few minutes, his name is Antoine Porte de Gebelin, an active Freemason, in the latter part of the 18th century, started introducing these into Masonic lectures, and thus the cardinal virtues would naturally have been quite familiar to him when he came across tarot cards. It's therefore a concept that would doubtlessly have been fresh on his mind when he encountered his first deck. And in those cards, he saw an indication of the 4 cardinal virtues. The virtues are temperance, fortitude, prudence, and justice. And he saw that there are actually a temperance and a justice card, and there is a strength card, which is certainly fortitude, but he couldn't find a card to match with prudence. One thing that did jump out of him as being odd, the figure of the Hanged Man card, he erroneously believed was wrongly inverted. And so he said if the hanging man was to be turned right side up, the impression given would be one of a man, hands hidden behind his back, standing on one foot. And for him, that image, with its subtle indications of graceful poise and wise reserve, was perfectly fitting to represent the missing virtue. So here are the 4 virtues. Temperance, which has a card called Temperance, and later on, Eliphas Levi, who I'll talk about some more in a few minutes. His work was seminal in the development of magical and occult orders in societies such as the Theosophical Society, the Golden Dawn, the Order Templi Orientis, and others. And his influence is even felt in the southern jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite, where his writings inspired portions of Albert Pike's elaborate lectures. Levi was also an avid and knowledgeable brother Mason. He published in 2 parts as magnum opus, The Dogma and Ritual of High Magic, wherein, for the first time, a sort of unified theory of occultism was linked to ceremonial magic with astrology, alchemy, Kabbalah, etc. And taking center stage in his dizzying display was none other than our infamous and enigmatic tarot deck. However, he was a purist and was not content to be flipping over cards. He was looking for a card that would really match up with the idea of prudence. So, looking through the cards, he finally settled on the card of the Hermit. Well, strength is, as I said, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Strength is the second one of the virtues, and that has its own card. So he came up with the idea that the wisdom. Let me see if I can get it. Come on. This is my first time using this kind of an approach, and I'm a little shaky with it. The Hermit card. Prudence is defined in the Merriam-Webster dictionary as the ability to govern and discipline oneself by the use of reason. How fitting then to choose the Hermit, a figure cloaked with reserve and supported by discipline, whose path is illuminated by the singular lamp of reason. Yet the Hermit, for all its practical purposes, is a perfect fit for the virtue of prudence. Our 4 cardinal virtues within the tarot had been found, and it's the Justice card is the other of those 4. These 4 cardinal virtues are explained to the candidate when they take their second or fellowcraft degree. Antoine Porte de Gueblin, a French Mason who you see pictured here, claimed that the tarot had been rescued from the burning of the library in Alexandria, and he believed that the word tarot was taken from two Egyptian words, tar, meaning road, and ro, meaning royal, and together, the royal road. Let's see if I can get myself to go to the next card. Eliphas Levi, his given name was Alphonse Louis Constant, the leading esotericist of the 19th century, was the first to associate the tarot with Kabbalah, a body of knowledge passed mouth to ear when the student was ready to receive it, something that is in common with Masonry of a couple centuries ago. He associated the major arcana to the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, and the tree of life has become a key element in the Kabbalistic interpretation of the meaning of tarot cards. If I could get my next slide here. This is what is called the tree of life. Kabbalistically, the 10 sephiroths, which are the circles, represent aspects of human and divine consciousness. They're associated with the numbered cards of the minor arcana, the aces through the tens. And each of the 22 pathways connecting them is associated with one of the cards of the major arcana. The pathways relate the Sephiroth that they're connecting to show how that they interact together. And so like the first pathway, which is to the right of the top, is represented by the Fool. And so on through there, and the passage from the first Sephiroth, Kether, down to the 10th at the bottom is Malkuth, is likened to the journey of the human being, represented in this case by the Fool, towards self-realization. This may be compared, for those of you who are familiar with it, the symbolism of Masonic ashlars, which describe the lifetime work of a Freemason of refining himself to be fit for what we call the building not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. In other words, the building made up of masons and the individual stones in the structure, and the process of developing their character is the lesson of the ashlars. Let me see where I am here. Here we go. And many of Levy's books, including Transcendental Magic and the Magic Ritual of the Sanctum Regnum, he associates the tarot with the Jewish Kabbalah and the Tetragrammaton, from the Greek meaning consisting of 4 letters, the Hebrew name of God, commonly pronounced Jehovah. The word Kabbalah means to receive. It's a body of knowledge that is passed orally only when a student is determined to be ready. And Levy compared the major arcana to the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. The Kabbalistic tree of life is used to understand and interpret the tarot. And the tree of life, I already covered that part. Now we'll move on to my next slide, if I can get it up. There are 2 books that are featured in this month's Fraternal Review. One of them is called the Kabbalistic Tarot. I mentioned before Robert Wang as having created a modern version of the Golden Dawn Tarot. This textbook is a source book for the symbols of Western Hermetic Kabbalah. It's written by the co-creator of the Golden Dawn Tarot deck. It's the first and only work based on 4 major tarot decks in the most common use today. The Golden Dawn Tarot, the Thoth Tarot, which was created by, help me, Mary. Pardon me?
Crowley.
Yes, by Crowley. I mentioned that before. The Rider-Waite deck, and then the traditional Marseille tarot deck that I showed at the beginning. This book is particularly useful for learning the tarot because it goes through every one of the cards, and one of the things that's really interesting about the Golden Dawn Tarot is that they've actually given a name to each one of the minor arcana, which give you another insight into the meaning of those cards. And so each card, he goes through an explanation of what the features are that are most prominent in each of those 4 different decks, which gives you a wide scope of the understanding of those cards. The other book that, and this book we have on sale along with, at our booth downstairs. Actually, it's not downstairs, it's down a little ramp. This is called The Fool's Pilgrimage, and its subtitle is Kabbalistic Meditations on the Tarot. It's by Gnostic Bishop, Mason, and Jung scholar Stephen A. Heller, and it focuses on the way in which each of the Tarot's 22 major arcana serve as symbols for a certain method of meditation, the object of which, he tells us, is similar to what Jung calls individuation, by which he means the lifelong work of self-realization. We have signed copies of this book. It also has it for sale. I think they're $25 a piece. It also has a CD in the back of the book, which has meditation, a guided meditation that is read by Dr. Heller, and that is highly recommended for anybody who wants to get further into the details of this. And it also emphasizes something that I would like to particularly emphasize again, which is that to get to a true level of deep understanding of symbolism, whether it be the tarot or the Kabbalah or Masonic symbolism, is meditation. The idea in meditation is to put the 4 suits in the Kabbalistic interpretation of the tarot. The suit of pentacles, sometimes called coins, has to do with your physical body and how it interacts with the physical world. The suit of cups has to do with your emotional body and how you interact emotionally with the world. The suit of swords has to do with your mental body, your intellect, and how it deals with life. And one of the reasons why it's swords is because most of the kind of things that you do intellectually is you destruct things by cutting them into parts and relating them. So the cards that are in the suit of swords have to do with your thought life. And then fourth, the suit of wands, which look like branches. In the old French decks, they're called batons. That has to do with higher consciousness. Those 4 in that sequence happen to be the steps of doing the kind of meditation I'm talking about, where in the alignment You first quiet your physical body, then quiet your emotional body, quiet your mental body with its random thoughts, and try to ascend to a level of your own highest consciousness. That highest consciousness has a connection between the spark of divinity, which is in each human soul, and whatever that magnificent thing is that people call by various names, God, or whatever. In the Masonic tradition, a belief in God is a necessary element of being a Mason, but what that conception is left to the individual conscience of a Mason. And we are strictly forbidden and take an oath never to be critical of another person's understanding of God. And another thing that I think is really one of the most essential things connecting Kabbalah and the Tarot and Freemasonry is what they are used for. They are used for exploring consciousness. The archetypes, this is why Jung comes into this, and he himself was very much into tarot and wrote on the subject. These archetypes, and each one of the tarot cards represents one or more archetypes. These are part of what Jung calls the collective conscience, or the collective consciousness of human beings. And at that level, the level of your higher self, your soul, we're all connected on a subtle plane. It's not as dense as any of those other three, the mental, the emotional, and the physical. And so each one of these symbolic representations, through the use of archetypes, wants to get you to intuitionally connect to what those archetypes stand for. And the whole idea of how you transform yourself is that you get in deeper and deeper touch with how your particular individual self relates to these universal principles. And by doing this kind of connection and this kind of relating, you lectures every Friday. The ones he's doing right now are on mythology. I went to one of those last night where he talked in great detail about Joseph Campbell. And on Tuesdays, there is a tarot class that's taught by a really brilliant man named Jack Getz. There's no cost, although donations are welcome. Those lessons are every Tuesday night. They start at 8:30. His explanations, which are brilliant, go until about a little bit before 11. Then he takes a little break, and then he does a meditation. Again, re-emphasizing that if you want to get into a real understanding of anything that's symbolic, meditation is the way to do it. I would highly recommend those. That's on Beechwood Drive, which is the road that goes up, or it used to go up almost all the way to the Hollywood sign, but it's now blocked well below that. But it's on Beechwood Drive, about 9/10 of a mile north of Franklin in East Hollywood. I would recommend those Tuesday night tarot. And if you're interested in getting a tarot reading, usually the last Thursday of the month they have tarot readings, and if you get there early enough, you can sign up. Jack teaches a class to tarot readers as well, and anywhere from 4 or 5 to 7 or 8 of those show up, and they will do readings for you. Any other questions? Yes?
I just had one that's a little different. Was Joseph Campbell a Mason?
I do not believe that Joseph Campbell was a Mason. On the other hand, there are a lot of people who so exemplify Masonic consciousness that the fact that they were not literally a Mason doesn't have all that significance. I was a high school history teacher before I went to law school, and one of my big heroes in American history is Abraham Lincoln. And I give a talk on was Abraham Lincoln a Freemason? And the short answer was he had petitioned a lodge of Freemasons prior to being nominated to be the president. And he asked them to hold his petition in abeyance, and it was his intent to come back and join Masonry after the presidency. But of course we know he never survived the presidency. But the bulk of what I talk about in the talk is quoting things that he had to say and things that he did. And I try to make the point that as revealed by his quotes, in consciousness, this man was a Mason, regardless of whether he ever took the degrees. There are many, 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 perhaps even a majority of Masons that take the degrees, but never really get it on a deep level. There are what are called knife and fork lodges, where the fellowship, which is a wonderful thing, and the meals, there's almost a shibboleth among Masons that says, Masons meet, Masons eat. It's been a challenge to me since I became active in Masonry to keep from being fattened up by that, but the most important point, and what I put to the question to my audience is when they talk about Lincoln, is it more important that you took the degrees of Masonry, or that somehow intuitionally you understood the world in the same way that Masonry defines the world? Another interesting thing about that was, in the 1840s, there was actually an anti-Masonic party in the United States following something that's called the Morgan Affair, where a Mason who had threatened to publish the ritual was kidnapped by some Masons from New York, and the brother died in captivity, probably completely by accident, but it created a huge backlash against Masonry, and the membership plummeted prior to the Civil War. One of the things that revived it was, during the Civil War, there were a lot of what were called field lodges. Many Masons were in the armies on both sides, and so it got very popular. A great number of men were in these Masonic lodges, and it was after the Civil War that we went into the era where all of these Masonic edifices were being built through the last third of the 19th century and well into the first half of the 20th century. And one of the interesting things is that when Lincoln became nominated for the presidency, the three other Republicans that were contenders, all of whom joined his cabinet later, had anti-Masonry in their political past. And the reason he was able to be elected with only about 42% of the vote, and despite not being on the ballot in about 9, I think, of the southern states, was because the Democrats that year nominated 3 different men, and they split the Democratic vote. All 3 of those men were Masons. So Masonry is, and the really interesting period of American history is during the colonial and times and the Revolution. A lot of the people that signed the Declaration of Independence and who signed the Constitution in 1787 were Masons, including people like George Washington and Benjamin Franklin. So many of the ideals of the United States of America come straight out of the ideals of Freemasonry through those kind of people. The same way that the ideals in Freemasonry are expressed in these modern tarot decks because of the roles played by several of the people that I profiled briefly in this talk. Anything else? We've got like about a minute or two. I'm getting the 1 minute signal. That's it? Well, thank you very much.